My name is Max. I'm the Director of Engineering for Liquid Storefronts at Shopify, which means I own and run the teams that are responsible for how both developers and merchants build their Liquid themes. Now, today we're going to be covering a few different things. We're going to kick it off with a Horizon demo, where I'm going to dive into some of the features that make Horizon unique and different than all the themes that we had before. And then I'm going to cover the skeleton theme, which is a new baseline for developers to build their themes with, theme blocks, which is the underlying platform feature that we shipped at the winter edition that Horizon is now based on. And then I'm going to cover some of the other features that we have shipped in the meantime to make Horizon even better, including conditional settings, liquid dock, and then a bunch of smaller bonus features. And quite frankly, all of this is going to involve a bunch of live coding. I'm going to be showing you all of this effectively live and walk you through some of the learnings that we had along this journey of building Horizon. All right, kicking it off with a Horizon demo here. I'm going to start sharing my screen and open up the admin for Pitch, which is one of the Horizon themes that we shipped at the summer edition. And if you look at the way this theme is built, you'll immediately notice these new nested theme blocks. There's now this group block, which you'll see everywhere across all the themes. And then there's things like text blocks and many other theme blocks as well. These theme blocks are now global to the entire theme and can be reused in any section. And these theme blocks are really what enables this advanced level of customization that Horizon gives merchants that wasn't possible to build before theme blocks. And out of the box, Horizon ships with some, 25, 30 odd theme blocks that can be used in any section. And the core of it really comes down to sort of the button, the text, the heading, the logo, and then as well as the sort of layout things, especially the group, which allows you to move things to the left and to the right. Now, what's special about this is that with theme blocks is the first time that merchants can actually build custom layouts without having to go talk to a developer. And so, for example, let's say in this theme here, I want to have a section that maybe at the bottom here, let's say, that renders an image on the left and then some content on the right, and then another row that renders the image on the right and the content on the left. And I want this section to show different products or highlight different collections that we want to show. This is a very common section that you'll see on lots of e-commerce stores. And so the way you would build that is you would start off with the custom section. This custom section is effectively an empty container. When you add it, nothing happens because the custom section is an empty container that you can then build anything within with theme blocks. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a first row here, which I'm going to do with a group block. And this group block, I'm going to make sure to make horizontal because each row is horizontal and we'll have an image on the left and then some content on the right. And within that group, let's just for now render an image, which is going to show up on the left, and then another group for some content on the right. And I'm going to add some text here that just says some basic text. Now, immediately, of course, this image is quite too large. We want this really to be 50-50. And so in this image, I can now say a desktop width of custom 50%. And now this is going to take up 50% of the overall width. And then in here, I need to make sure that this is set to fill. This is also to fill. That's great. And then this group also needs to have a width of 50% on desktop so that they're equally spread. I actually don't know why this image isn't showing up as the full width here, because this should be 50% of the overall section. Hold on, let me look at the inspector here for a second. This image is, so the overall group, it's because the overall group already does the 50% width, so we actually just need to make this fill and then make this guy fill too. Nope. There we go. And then these will be split 50-50. So now we have an image on the left, some content on the right. And again, as a merchant, I can now go in here and I can add any content that I want, right? And so if I want to add some CTAs, I want to add a heading, I want to add a button to link to my collection, I can do all of this visually in the editor without having to rely on a developer to build the whole new custom section for me. Obviously, this isn't beautiful yet. You would want to adjust the sort of layout here a little bit, the spacing, add some padding. I'm going to ignore that for the sake of this demo. Just to show you can now also rename these sections. I'm going to name this a row, I'm going to rename this to be content so it's clearer in the sidebar here. And then I'm going to duplicate this row. And so now I can duplicate this whole thing. Then I have another row. I'm going to move the image to the bottom so that it shows up on the right. And now I have, oops, I accidentally moved it out of the entire row. Let me move this up. Here we go. And so now I have two rows where on the first one, I have an image on the left, content on the right. On the bottom one, I have content on the left, image on the right. This is great. And this works. And merchants can now click through the settings. There's a bit of getting used to with the group block and how it works and how exactly to adjust the spacing and where. And there's a bit of a learning curve here, but it's really for advanced merchants that want to be able to do something themselves without having to rely on developers for some of these basic sections. However, for many things, this works great. However, already with this section, there's two sort of problems that are basically impossible to solve by just clicking together things in the editor. And the first one is, which is slightly minor, which is that when you reorder rows, let's say I duplicate this again, I'm going to move the image to the left here. If I were to reorder this bottom row with this wave sort of image and move it up a notch, now these two images are on the same side. And if I wanted to fix that, I would now have to go through every other row and adjust the order again so that it's on the correct side. Minor detail, merchants can definitely do this. As you have many rows, this would get slightly unwieldy, but it's not a big deal. The much bigger problem is that when we look at mobile, because on mobile, of course, the things are ordered in the same way, just stacked on top of each other, which means for the first row, because we have the content over the image, we see the content over the image. But then for the second row, where we have the image over the content, we see the image over the content. And then for the third one, again, we have the content over the image because we want the image to be on the left, on the right, and on the left, on the right, and on the left. We now have the content ahead of the image again. And this is just not a great experience, right? On mobile, really what you usually want to see is the image be consistently above the content every time. This is the layout that we would expect to see on mobile that should show up for our buyers. And effectively, that is impossible to do with theme blocks. That level of mobile customizability isn't possible with theme blocks out of the box. And so that was the big learning that we had with Horizon. And in fact, it was almost this exact section that prompted this learning. While you can build a lot of the sections, even the ones that are in Horizon today, like a hero, a split showcase, a collection list, a contact form, a product list, an editorial section, an FAQ section, you can build a lot of these with just theme blocks in the editor. But for some of these sections, you actually end up wanting to build a bespoke version that has some slight tweaks in it that make it easier to use for merchants, that cleans up the sidebar a little bit, that makes it such that the sidebar actually reflects the intent, like I did here with row and content and renaming it, and then also works well across mobile and desktop. This isn't true for all sections. And so we've ended up sort of with some sections being just presets of the custom section with lots of theme blocks in them. And for other sections where we realized, we need some, we need that little bit of custom flavor to make it more usable, either for buyers or for merchants, then we ended up building custom sections for them. And so a lot of the sections that you'll see in the section picker today, a lot of these basic sections like Hero are actually custom sections that we ended up building from scratch. They're based on, they have similar settings as the group and the custom section, the text block, but they ultimately are bespokely built to just be a little bit more usable for merchants or for buyers. And so what we're going to do in this workshop now is I'm actually going to build an alternating rows section with theme blocks from scratch. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to kick that off with the skeleton theme. The skeleton theme was updated to reflect a new baseline that represents the core of Horizon. And it's very minimal compared to before. When you ran Shopify theme in it, you would get all of Dawn. But that doesn't make a lot of sense because nobody takes Dawn and then builds a custom theme with it, right? There's a lot of craft in Dawn that you don't actually need if you're just building a theme for one merchant. And if you're building something for the theme store, you want it to be custom and be your own version of the theme. And so you also don't want to start with Dawn. And so we shipped a new, very, very minimal starting point for themes called the skeleton theme that you now get when you run Shopify Theme Init, which is exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm going to run Shopify Theme Init here. I'm going to name this Horizon Workshop Theme. This is going to clone the skeleton theme and then put it into Horizon Workshop Theme. Beautiful. And now when I open this up in Cursor, we should have the sort of baseline of the skeleton theme in here. Oops, I didn't need to open that. And if we open up some of these things, we have a couple snippets. We have all the necessary templates. We have basically just two very simple blocks, the group top block and the text block, which are simplified versions of what we have in Horizon. We have, some sections that you need, but again, not everything. This is very much a minimal starting point where ideally you can take the skeleton theme and build your own custom theme on top without having to delete any code at all. That's the goal. And so there's very little in here, and it's really meant to be just, hey, I want to go build a new theme. I run Shopify theme in it, and then you hit the ground running. All right, now let's build this alternating rows section. So I'm going to start by just adding a new section, alternating rows.liquid. I'm going to start with the schema. In schema, thanks, cursor. We're going to give this a name, alternating rows, and we actually don't need any settings here, cursor, I don't think. Really what we want is, as the children of this alternating rows section, we want to allow a private alternating row block. Now, the way I mark this as a private block is by the underscore in front of the name. We'll have to create this block in a hot second. And that is the first sort of feature of theme blocks that I want to highlight here, which is private blocks. This alternating row block will only be able to be used in this alternating rows section, nowhere else, which is important because, of course, the alternating rows block depends on the alternating rows section. And then to mark where we sort of want to render the blocks, we simply write content for blocks. And now any blocks that will be rendered as children of this alternating rows section will show up in this div up here. Now, to stop theme check from complaining, I'm also going to add the actual alternating row block here, and then we're going to overlook at it in the browser to make sure I did all that correctly. I don't have any syntax errors. Again, we don't need any settings for now. We just take an alternating row block, and this, which for now, we're just going to render alternating row. And then this alternating row should show up. We're, of course, going to have to add a preset here because otherwise it won't show up in the section picker. Name alternating rows, and then equally here, we're going to need to add a preset. And we're just going to keep it simple for now. We're just going to add alternating row as the name of it. Now, when I run Shopify theme dev, let me copy this little URL here. /store. We run Shopify theme dev with the store. We now get a preview. And when we look at this in the admin, we should have a new alternating rows section in the section picker. This, by the way, is the starting point of the skeleton theme. As you can see, there's effectively nothing in it except for this hello world section, which we actually don't need. We're just going to add alternating rows, which has no settings. And then within that, we should be able to add the alternating row block. And in fact, we should be able to add multiple of the alternating row blocks. Note, though, I can't add any other theme blocks because I've specified blocks to only include the alternating row. And so the only block that can be added as a child of this alternating row section is an alternating row. I'm going to save this so that we have it sort of saved here. And now comes the real fun. Each alternating row will render two sub-theme blocks statically. When we render blocks statically, merchants cannot add or remove them. We want each alternating row to have an image and some content. And we want that image and that content to be there no matter what. And so the way you statically, this is effectively dynamically rendering blocks. You can render any block here. Now, here in this alternating row block, we're just going to say content for block. And we're going to go type alternating row image first. ID alternating row image. And then we're going to do the same thing with alternating row content. Of course, these two don't exist, and we have to add them. So we're going to do that next. We're going to go alternating row image.liquid. This will just render an image. I'm just going to assume that famous last words. No, we don't want a preset. Actually, we want a settings here. And then this should be block.settings.image. Missing width and height attributes. We'll figure that out in a second. I'll just go width and height equals 100% for now. Save that. This now renders an image. We'll see if I actually got that right on the first try. And the other one we needed was the alternating row content.liquid, which is just going to render some content. I'll update that in a second, because here now is where we enable full theme blocks usage by saying we don't need settings. Instead, we say blocks type at theme. And in fact, I'm also going to add, although we don't have any app blocks here, I'm going to add type at app. And so now this alternating row content, exactly, we want to actually render content for blocks here. This alternating row content block now allows any theme block and any app block to be rendered within it. And this alternating row image block allows an image to be rendered, and both of them are statically rendered from the alternating row section. So now when we open up the editor here, which automatically hot reloaded, which by the way is also something we shipped at the edition, we now have an image and content which are statically rendered. So these cannot be removed by merchants. These cannot be moved around. Every single alternating row has an alternating row image and content. And in fact, now that I'm looking at it, I'm actually just going to rename this to image and content because I think that looks nicer in the sidebar. Image and content. So each alternating row now has image and content. And within the content, we can render anything we want. In this case, we have a text block. So I'm just going to render the text block and say, content here. In a real theme, you would obviously have more content here, but we'll sort of add that a little bit later. Let me add that here too, and then let me add some more text down here too. I'm going to hit save just to make sure that that's saved. All right. Now, of course, we have no images selected here, so let me just select some images. I'm going to add this one. That looks nice. Great. We're going to add this one, maybe that guy. And we're going to add a third image, just make sure we have a couple of rows to look at here. Beautiful. So now we have 3 images. We have 3 alternating rows, each with an image and some content. Now, of course, we don't have the layout yet. These are just rendered as random diffs. The way we're actually going to do the layout here is we're going to go into our alternating rows section. And I'm going to give this a class of alternating row. And effectively, in our alternating rows section, I'm going to add a style sheet tag, which we also ship support for across blocks and snippets. In style sheet. And I'm going to mark each alternating row as display flex and say flex row, and we don't need the gap. We also don't need the alignment. This should now be they should now all be in rows. There we go. So now we have 3 rows. The trick with making them alternating is to go, hey, alternating each child of this alternating rows section. Actually, we don't even need that. We can just go alternating row nth of type odd. We go flex direction row reverse, and so now each odd alternating row should be reversed. Why are all of them reversed right now? I'm guessing it's because I didn't go tag null, and up here I will then need to add block.shopify attributes. See if that fixes it, because that wrapper will certainly mess up the, there we go. This will mess up the nth of type detection. And actually we want the even ones to be row reverse, not the odd ones, which is a minor note here. Okay, so now we have images with content on the left, content on the right, content on the left. And these now also are already automatically reordered. If I put this little bottle here as the second row in my section, the first one will have the image on the left and the second one will have the image on the right. Because of course we're just using CSS nth of type even to say, hey, every second one should be row reverse. And now every second one is row reverse. Simple as that. Of course, I can now clean up the styling here. I'm probably going to go into the alternating row, and I'm going to add another style sheet tag here just to make it a little bit nicer. Style sheet in style sheet. The alternating row, we just want to say flex 1, I think, should do it so that they're both the same width. Oh, I didn't save my changes. That was a mistake, because then we can't hot reload. Doesn't matter. We're just going to do a full reload. And here we go. Now we have a beautiful alternating row section where each image is on the left, image is on the right, image is on the left. When we reorder these, of course, as we already know, although this time I'm going to actually save the change, the image are automatically reordered. So we already have one of these requirements done. And in the content, our merchants can now put anything, right? They can add more text here if they wanted. They could add the group block to sort of lay things out differently. They could add buttons if we had a button theme block. All these things certainly could exist. And now there's one more requirement that we had that we wanted to work better than building this out visually in the editor with theme blocks in Horizon, which is on mobile. We want it to, of course, not be half 50-50, but we want it to be full width. And then also we want the image to always be on top, right? And so the way we do that is we go on mobile. Oops, cursor, that was a bit too fast for me. We want at media screen and width is smaller than 768 pixels, let's just say, for the sake of this demo. We want each alternating row to be, oh, actually, let's put that in the alternating rows one here. Alternating row, we want each alternating row to be, no, it does actually need to be here. Take that back. We want each child to, I guess we'll just say flex initial maybe. Let's see if that works. Oh no, we want this to not be a row. That's what we really want. We want flex direction column here. This is what we really want. Ignore this part. Although we also need this part because we want them to be full width. So now we have full width images and contents. I don't know why this isn't. Okay. So now we have image on the top, text at the bottom for all of them, except for that middle one, where for some reason this didn't apply. The reason this didn't apply is because, let me delete this. I'll leave it in here. The reason this didn't apply is because this nth of type selector actually has higher specificity than this medius query with this alternating row. And so flex direction is still set to row reverse because this overrides this. And so I'm just going to hack around this with the ugly old way with an important. If I were in the real code base, I would do this differently. Now, when this refreshes, we have all the images full width and all the content full width too. And for every content, we actually have the text below the image fully automatically. I didn't even need to do anything because the way we reversed it was with row reverse, not in the sidebar. In the sidebar, the image is always on top, but on desktop, we just tell it via CSS to put the image on the correct side, depending on how manyth alternating row it is. On mobile, we just say column, and the image automatically shows up on top. So now we've built a new bespoke alternating row section that's using theme blocks to give merchants an alternating row section that on desktop has images always on the alternating side, and then on mobile has the image always on top. And also, we've used both private theme blocks as well as statically rendered theme blocks to create our ideal merchant user experience. We now have these static blocks that can't be removed because every row needs to have an image and some content. And then within the content, you can render any kind of app block or theme block. If we had any app blocks here, we could add it, which I don't want to do right now. And so then merchants have full customizability of what they actually want to express in the alternating rows while having this great experience. All right, from here, I'm going to jump back into my slide deck to walk through some of the other things that we shipped. The first one is conditional settings. Now, conditional settings ended up becoming really useful in Horizon because at some point we realized a lot of these generic theme blocks ended up having a lot of settings, right? And so, for example, in this text block example that we have here, we wanted to have a preset setting. And that preset setting could be, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, or you could click on custom and create completely custom text settings, right? Line height, font weight, font size, all these letter spacing, all these text settings that you might want to customize for a specific text block that you're using on a page. But then when the custom preset isn't selected, we really don't want to show those settings to the merchant. We really just want them to use the preset. And then if the preset is selected, to use the preset. Don't let them change it. Only when they actually want to customize it beyond the preset that we have is when we wanted to show the settings. And so that's where conditional settings come in. They're very simple to enable. In your settings schema, you add this property that says visible if, and then you can say block.settings.type preset equals custom in your standard Liquid syntax, and you will get the setting to only show up when another setting is configured that way, which is very useful. And if you click around Horizon a little bit, you'll see conditional settings in many places, or if you go click on edit code and look at the code and search for visible if, you'll see visible if in lots of places because it makes the settings panels much less overwhelming for merchants, especially with some of these very generic blocks like text and group, where there's lots of different settings that interplay in different ways. It could be overwhelming, and conditional settings really help style that back. Another great feature that we shipped is Liquid Doc, which is developer facing and allows you to document for your snippets and blocks what parameters they expect. And then in your editor, when you have the Liquid VS Code extension installed, you will get highlights and warnings when required parameters aren't passed, or warnings when you pass parameters that actually aren't documented. And so you get a much better developer experience, especially for your snippets, which can often have many parameters. If you've ever looked at a production theme, this allows you to document them and give them a really great developer experience. And then finally, just to wrap us up here, we have shipped some smaller bonus features. I'm going to mention them. You can look up the changelog if you want on how to enable them. I just want to make sure that you're aware that they exist and how to use them, and that you can use them. So the first bonus feature that we shipped was preset categories for sections and blocks. If you look at the Horizon section and block picker, it's not just a long list of 30 theme blocks that are completely uncategorized. They actually have little categories like layout and text that each sort of group related theme blocks together. And that makes it much easier for merchants to find the one that they're looking for. And the way to enable that is really quite simple. You add a category key to your section or block schema, and then everything that has the same category name shows up in that category in the section and block picker, and you have full control over what those categories are called and whatever you think makes sense for the sections and blocks that you have. The second thing we shipped is recommended block presets, where we realized that in some sections, you don't necessarily want the merchants to use all of the theme blocks. Like if you're looking at a product card, you probably don't need to add a marquee to a product card, right? But at the same time, you also don't want to restrict it, right? Maybe merchants, want to do something custom and actually have a use case where that makes sense, even though it's a niche use case. But then every time you want to add a block to the product card, you're now having to look past the marquee, and it's not a great experience. And so when you have a block or a section that has blocks type at theme and allows all theme blocks to be passed into it, you can then afterwards optionally also specify recommended blocks. And so, for example, for a product card, you would have type add theme, and then you would have type product title, type product price, type ratings, whatever other theme blocks that you want to highlight. And then those will show up first in the block picker, and then merchants can click on show more if they want to see the rest of the blocks too. But by default, it will only show the recommended ones to sort of have a more streamlined bit of success experience for merchants. And then on the developer side, we shipped parameters for static blocks. So you can now pass data to static blocks, just like you can with snippets. This was very useful to be able to reuse some blocks, and even when they're rendered statically, and pass some data from parents to children. If you look at Horizon, you'll see a couple of use cases for this, but you'll know it if you need it. And it works just like snippets. After the ID, you just pass in any data you want, and it will show up in the block. We shipped some new liquid array filters, has, find index, find. These just make it much easier to work with arrays, which there are a lot of in liquid themes. So now you can filter for things and find indexes of things much more simply with simple filters. And finally, we shipped the JavaScript and style sheet tags across snippets, blocks, and sections. And so now across all of these, they are now the new recommended way to write JavaScript and CSS for those sections, blocks, and snippets. This is nice for the developer experience because now all the code for one section or snippet or block is co-located, and you don't need to deal with a snippets folder that an assets folder that has 150 files for every single different snippet, the JavaScript and the CSS. You don't have to deal with any of that. You just have a style sheet tag and a JavaScript tag in your section, block, or snippet. However, it has a second less obvious benefit, because by having the JavaScript and the style sheet tags in your sections, block, and snippets, it tells us on the rendering side, as the platform that actually renders these liquid themes, it tells us which JavaScript and which style sheets are and which CSS is connected to which section, block, and snippet. And so that means we can now control how to most efficiently deliver that to your buyers without you even having to think about it. Now, right now, if you actually look under the hood of what happens, all the JavaScript and CSS just gets basically combined into one big global.js and global.css file that gets served to all of your buyers. But we're going to be running experiments based on this information in the future. For example, a very obvious one is don't include the JavaScript or CSS of sections, blocks, or snippets that aren't used in a theme. Okay, automatic dead code elimination. Another one we're going to be running is what would it do to your performance and corollarily to your conversion rate if we shipped a bundle per page, right? So that the product page bundle includes only the things that are actually used on the product page. The homepage only includes the code of the sections, blocks, and snippets that are actually used on the homepage, etc. Or maybe that doesn't make any sense because people usually visit multiple pages. What if we had a bundle for just your critical pages, right? Your homepage, your collections page, and your PDP page. What if those were bundled together and then everything else came into sort of like an other bundle that is only fetched when actually needed, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of other experiments we're going to be running here, but fundamentally, there's a big benefit to these tags communicating the intent to us, right? We now know, hey, this JavaScript and this CSS is necessary for this section, block, or snippet to work correctly. And we can use that information to serve it most efficiently to your buyers without you having to even think about it. And so I would highly recommend, this is now the sort of green path for writing JavaScript and CSS in your themes. Now, granted, there's always some base level of JavaScript and CSS that shows up in various files. Even if you look at Horizon, there's some CSS files and some JavaScript files. It doesn't replace all of it, but for a lot of it, for the solid 80% across all those core components, you now use those tags, and we will make sure to deliver it to your users as efficiently as possible. All right, that was a quick run through. If you want to know more about these features, highly recommend just look up the changelog entries. They all have changelog entries that explain how to use them, and link to the dev docs that explain even more in depth on how to use them and when to use them. This wraps up the Horizon Under the Hood masterclass. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to ping me anytime. I'm on Twitter, and if you reach out to support, the questions also eventually reach me. So I'm really curious to see what kind of themes, what kind of experiences you all can build for your merchants. I hope you all enjoy the new developer experiences that we've shipped, and let us know if you have any feedback, any learnings on your own experiences from using theme blocks. We're very curious to learn from the community as you start using more of these features with your merchants. Thanks for being here.